Why do some politicians never seem ashamed? Psychopathy, Sociopathy, the Dark Triad, and the Psychology of Power. Welcome back. In part 1, we explored one of the most fundamental questions in human psychology. Why do human beings experience shame? We discovered that shame is not merely an unpleasant emotion. It is a social survival mechanism, one that helps people recognize mistakes, repair relationships, and maintain trust within a community. We also examined how empathy, guilt, and remorse differ significantly from one person to another, and why psychiatry treats Antisocial Personality Disorder. ASPD is a carefully defined clinical diagnosis, rather than a label for anyone who behaves badly. Today, we move one step further. We'll examine how criminal psychology distinguishes between psychopathy and sociopathy, and then we'll explore how political psychologists use the concept of the Dark Triad to better understand manipulative leadership and the effects of power. Again, an important reminder, the concepts discussed in this lecture are educational tools for understanding patterns of behavior. They are not a basis for diagnosing any specific public figure or political leader. Psychopathy and sociopathy, similar but not identical. In everyday conversation, the words psychopath and sociopath are often used interchangeably. In psychology, however, the distinction is more nuanced. Neither term is an official diagnosis in the DSM-5. Instead, they describe different patterns of traits that researchers have studied for decades. Although individuals can vary widely, psychopathy is generally associated with a combination of characteristics such as superficial charm, fearlessness, low anxiety, limited empathy, reduced guilt or remorse, manipulative behavior, emotional detachment. Many researchers believe biological factors may contribute to these traits, although no single cause has been identified. Psychopaths often remain calm under extreme pressure. Situations that produce panic or guilt in most people may have surprisingly little emotional impact on them. That calmness can sometimes be mistaken for exceptional confidence or leadership. But emotional stability and emotional detachment are not the same thing. The sociopath. Sociopathy is often used to describe individuals whose behavior appears to have been shaped more strongly by environmental influences. Researchers point to factors such as childhood abuse, chronic neglect, violent environments, severe family instability, repeated exposure to antisocial behavior. Unlike psychopaths, sociopaths often experience stronger emotions. They may become angry quickly. They can form attachments to certain people. They usually understand that society disapproves of their actions. Yet instead of accepting responsibility, they frequently justify their behavior through distorted thinking. The power of self-justification. One of the most fascinating discoveries in psychology is that human beings are remarkably skilled at protecting their own self-image. Few people wake up believing they are the villain. Instead, they create explanations that allow them to see themselves as justified. Psychologists call this self-rationalization or cognitive distortion. Examples include, everyone is against me. They're afraid of the truth. The media is lying. I'm being unfairly targeted. I'm the real victim. These beliefs are not unique to politics. They can appear in workplaces, families, friendships, and even ordinary disagreements. However, when someone possesses significant influence or political power, these psychological mechanisms can become amplified. The greater the power, the easier it becomes to surround oneself with people who reinforce existing beliefs rather than challenge them. Power changes the environment. One of the most important questions in political psychology is this: does power corrupt people? Or does power simply reveal who they already were? The answer appears to be both. Research suggests that power changes the psychological environment. As individuals gain authority, they often encounter fewer people willing to disagree with them. Criticism becomes less frequent. Praise becomes more common. Decision-making becomes increasingly isolated. Over time, this environment can strengthen overconfidence and reduce self-correction. Even psychologically healthy leaders must actively guard against these effects. Without honest feedback, anyone can begin believing their own narrative. The Dark Triad. Political psychologists often discuss a framework known as the Dark Triad. It consists of 3 personality dimensions: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathic traits. Having some characteristics associated with one of these traits does not automatically mean someone has a personality disorder. These are dimensions that exist along a spectrum. Most people display at least some degree of self-interest or ambition, The concern arises when these traits become extreme and begin dominating a person's behavior. Let's examine each one. Narcissism. Narcissism is far more than self-confidence. Healthy confidence allows someone to recognize both strengths and weaknesses. Extreme narcissism makes criticism feel intolerable. The narcissistic individual often believes, "I am exceptional. I deserve special treatment. Ordinary rules shouldn't apply to me." Because maintaining a grand self-image becomes psychologically essential, admitting mistakes feels almost impossible. Instead, criticism may be dismissed as jealousy, ignorance, or political persecution. In this way, the absence of visible shame may function as a defense mechanism, protecting an inflated sense of self. Machiavellianism. The second component is Machiavellianism. Named after the Renaissance political thinker Niccolò Machiavelli, this personality style emphasizes strategic manipulation. For highly Machiavellian individuals, morality becomes secondary to achieving objectives. Truth is useful when it serves a purpose. Deception is acceptable if it produces results. Relationships become instruments rather than genuine human connections. When a scandal occurs, their first question is rarely, "How do I make this right?" Instead, it is often, "How can I use this situation to my advantage?" Public outrage becomes another political resource to manage. Psychopathic traits. The third component involves psychopathic characteristics. These include reduced empathy, fearlessness, emotional detachment, limited remorse, greater willingness to take risks. Again, possessing one trait does not make someone a psychopath. Human personalities are extraordinarily complex. Nevertheless, research consistently shows that individuals scoring higher on psychopathic traits often remain emotionally unaffected by situations that deeply disturb others. This can make them appear unusually decisive. Under crisis conditions, calm leadership can be beneficial. However, when calmness results from indifference rather than emotional regulation, the consequences may become dangerous. When all three combine. Imagine a leader who believes, "I am uniquely qualified to rule." At the same time, that leader also believes, "Any method is acceptable if it helps me achieve my goals." And finally, "I feel little emotional discomfort when others suffer because of my decisions." This combination represents the theoretical model known as the Dark Triad. Political psychologists have argued that leaders exhibiting very high levels of these traits may become especially effective at manipulating public perception, while remaining unusually resistant to shame or criticism. Importantly, however, identifying these patterns requires careful evidence and should never be reduced to simplistic political labels. Psychology explains tendencies, not certainty. Why charisma can be misleading. One of the greatest mistakes voters can make is confusing confidence with competence. History repeatedly demonstrates that charismatic speakers often inspire enormous public enthusiasm. Competence attracts attention. Certainty creates comfort. People naturally gravitate toward individuals who appear completely convinced of their own beliefs. But psychology teaches us something important. Confidence alone tells us almost nothing about whether a person is honest, ethical, or correct. Some of history's most respected leaders demonstrated humility. Some of history's most destructive leaders projected absolute certainty. The difference lies not in competence itself, but in the capacity for self-correction. Leaders who can acknowledge mistakes remain psychologically flexible. Leaders who cannot may gradually lose contact with reality. Coming up in Part 3. So how should ordinary citizens evaluate political leaders? If confidence isn't enough, if charisma can be deceptive, if public appearances reveal only part of the story, what should we actually look for? In Part 3, we'll explore the psychology of democratic leadership, why some populations become attracted to seemingly fearless leaders, how authoritarian personalities cultivate loyalty, and the practical questions every citizen should ask before placing trust in anyone seeking power. We'll also discuss why genuine empathy and the ability to admit mistakes may be among the strongest indicators of healthy leadership. If today's discussion gave you a new perspective on psychology and politics, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with others who enjoy thoughtful conversations about human behavior and leadership. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in Part 3.